Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to talk more about the possibility of League of Legends getting a permanent PvE game mode and how I don't think that this is too far of a stretch, regardless of what Riot said about a year ago. Now, if you haven't seen their article, Riot basically discussed all of their sort of alternate game modes and more or less said we're never going to commit to doing PvE game modes, at least for the foreseeable future. These are things like Star Guardian, Invasion, or Odyssey Extraction, which are modes where you literally just play against bots. They are cooperative. You do queue up because you do need other people to play with, but otherwise the enemies you are fighting are all computer-controlled AI robots. And essentially they said, we dislike these game modes because they tend to not have very high engagement past the first couple of days. People sort of play the mode, they spam it, they love it right after the release, and then they sort of stop playing it. And these game modes did include lots of large asset production required, even though they're reusing a lot of things, like just reskinning previous models that they've had, or reskinning champions even that they've had before in order to make them into enemies and use skins from the champions that they're releasing. There's still a lot of development that goes into creating these game modes, and they more or less said with the amount of time we're actually spending on these PvE game modes, we could be doing a lot of other things, and so we've sort of decided to stop doing these. Now, this was their stance about a year ago, but I think that recent developments have made me think that the odds of getting a PvE game mode are significantly higher than we would have guessed. And the biggest reason for this is due to the success of Legends of Runeterra's Path of Champions. Now, if you don't play the game, Path of Champions is a strictly PvE game mode in which you choose a champion and you gain a generic starter deck, and you play through a variety of AI opponents. Now, the kicker is that the AI opponents and yourself can modify or upgrade their deck with a variety of items which you attach to individual cards to make them stronger, or with a variety of extra powers that operate outside of the normal rules of the game. Things like at the beginning of turn 1 you summon a free unit, or at the beginning of each round you gain an extra mana gem or refill your spell mana, things like that. Now, the biggest thing about the Path of Champions is that with the release of Arcane, Riot decided to take it in a very narrative-focused direction. They basically said, if you play through the stories of some of the Arcane champions like Vi or Jinx or Victor, then you're actually going to get a sort of mini story, right? As you're playing through the Path of Champions, you're going to see these sort of comic book style cutscenes that are detailing the actual events of the story. Every enemy you encounter along the Path of Champions is going to be in some way, shape, or form related to the story that we're telling, and successfully completing it is going to give you the end of the story. And now, Path of Champions and previous versions of it have been in Legends of Runeterra for quite some time, but Riot, when they did their Legends of Runeterra Season 2022 big capstone video, right, where they're talking about what their plans are for this year, they confirmed that Path of Champions is the most popular game mode in Legends of Runeterra. And not just the most popular game mode, it is the most popular game mode by far. Every other game mode combined doesn't live up to how many people are playing Path of Champions. And that blows my mind, because Legends of Runeterra has a couple of things going against it from a narrative PvE perspective. First, it's a card game, and card games are generally not known for being single-player experiences. Solitary notwithstanding, generally speaking, card games are multiplayer experiences. You and at least one other opponent playing against each other head-to-head. And Legends of Runeterra, because this is a Riot Games game, is intended to be focused on the super tight, competitive PvP experience where skill is the determining factor versus luck, yada yada yada, right? Whenever Riot make a game, they almost never say, oh, you know, this is for fun and we're specifically making this casual. They always say this is the most competitive game in its respective genre. So for Legends of Runeterra then, right, a card game created by Riot Games that only ever wants competitive PvP experiences, to be more known by more players for its PvE experience and for the story experience that it's giving these players is absolutely massive. And I think what it does is this is signaling a need that is not currently being met by Riot in any substantial margin. And this need is the desire by players for more story content, for more content involving, strictly speaking, the Runeterra world and the Runeterra IP and the Runeterra characters. the Runeterra, Legends of Runeterra gets sort of close because you have interactions between various units, and it sort of gives you a window into the world of Runeterra in a way that League of Legends and Teamfight Tactics don't really. TFT obviously just uses sort of skins and champions from the game without really any lore content to it whatsoever, and League gets a little bit into it, but because it's so focused around the champions and because the only map that really exists isn't a flavor map at all, right? Summoner's Rift, as far as we know, doesn't exist in the world of Runeterra. League can only hint at what the world might actually look like that all these characters are from. Conversely, Legends of Runeterra has given us a bigger window into it, and more importantly, is actually telling presumably canonical stories with its Path of Champions. And this is one of the biggest reasons why people have jumped onto it, especially given that I can't count the number of times I've seen people online say, basically, I love Runeterra, I love the characters, I love the story, I love the world, but I would never play League of Legends because I dislike that game. And I think that's a fair stance to have, I really do. But what it does show is that once you give players the opportunity to experience your world in a way that doesn't involve them playing a PvP experience and getting dunked on by people who are just there for the game, right? Because they're just here to experience the story, right? Which they can't do because the only way for them to play the game is PvP, and then they get dunked on and they don't have a good time. But so, giving them a PvE experience in Legends of Runeterra was a big deal in that regard, and that's why you have a ton of people playing it. And because of this, I think that then League of Legends can and should have a PvE game mode, because if you announced tomorrow, right, League of Legends is getting a permanent PvE game mode to play through that tells stories or shows off aspects of Runeterra, you would have people dusting off old accounts, or creating new accounts, or reinstalling the game, or logging back in after a long period of absence, right? I think you would have a ton of people who all of a sudden would say, wait, I actually want to play that. I want to go back to League of Legends, or I want to start playing League of Legends, because now I get to actually experience this story in an interactive environment, and I get to play through it. Remember, Path of Champions was the most played game mode in Legends of Runeterra, more than every other game mode combined. That is a massive amount of players, and I think that that shows that if Riot do invest the time and energy to creating a sustainable PvE environment, or PvE queue, that they will be rewarded for it at the end of the day. And I think because you have other games that have done this as well, right? Overwatch is a competitive PvP game. Really, there's not very much lore to it at all, especially in recent years where Blizzard has more or less been ignoring it, but that's a separate subject. But either way, Overwatch, for a long period of time, was creating individual yearly PvE missions for players to play through, and at this point they have enough of a backlog that whenever a new year rolls around, they have an archives event where they bring back the older missions and they allow you to play through this story content, or just play against bots for basically as long as you want. And if this method works for Blizzard, I feel like League of Legends has a fairly good shot at being able to establish a PvE queue of their own. And part of the thing is I think the reason Riot haven't had good success with it is because the stories they were telling with their previous PvE queues were not canon stories, right? These were stories that were told in skin universes, which, while skin universes do have their own set of lore, we know that it's not the main verse, so anything that happens here doesn't really matter, and we know that also there's never going to be any development on this until they introduce more characters with the next batch of skins, which is then going to dilute the story down further, and it just makes it hard to get actually invested into it, the story of a skin universe. Conversely, if you do an actual canon event, for example, if Riot had made a PvE game mode for the Sentinels of Light event, I think you would have a ton of players playing it non-stop, because this is a way to experience actual canonical storytelling in the world of Runeterra. That is a much bigger draw than saying, yeah, you can play this alternate PvE game mode. And I think that that would be a huge draw for people then when you set up a new event, right, especially a big story event like Sentinels of Light, or for the future, right, if Riot decide to do an event with the Watchers or do an event with a Noxian invasion of Ionia, to be able to say, hey, look, we have this PvE queue set up. And I think one of the ways in which Riot can make this easier on themselves from a development standpoint is, first, if you basically swallow the upfront costs of creating new environments yearly for a single PvE mission, over time, you will accumulate enough of these that then you can have a permanent PvE queue. You can say, more or less, you queue up for PvE, and it gives you one of these random missions for you to play through. And that way you're just playing bots, you're just having a good time with everyone else who's also queuing bots, and you're experiencing lore content the whole way. That's pretty cool. The other way I think you could do this is by essentially establishing somewhat of like a season, right? So, for example, in the Sentinels of Light year, where they said, you know, the first half or more of the year is all going to be about the Viego storyline. Then basically you commit to doing 3 individual smaller PvE missions throughout the year. You have the first mission detailing the rise of Viego and sort of the beginning of the Ruination. The second mission is the Sentinels sort of fighting back and recruiting, and the third mission is them eventually taking the fight to Viego. Now the kicker here is that you create enough generic assets that you're just able to repurpose them for each individual mission that you do. So even though Riot are still having to create assets the first time around, they're able to reuse them for subsequent PvE missions, and also then they're giving you a reason to keep the game installed and to keep checking back in, because there is going to be an update for the story down the road that players will be able to play through in the future. This also has a side effect of, for example, letting you play with the Sentinel skins, and maybe saying, hey, don't you like these? Well, you can buy these for your PvP games if you so choose. Which I think would be just like a tremendous advantage for them to have, especially in terms of marketing. But I think Riot knows this, and I would be surprised if they weren't already working on a PvE game mode. But I do want to say that if they are not, that this video should be a wake-up sign for Riot, that if you have this much interest in a PvE game mode, in a card game, imagine what you could do with a MOBA, and imagine what you could do with story elements in League of Legends. So here's hoping. I'm really hoping that they end up introducing a PvE game mode at some point, but I guess you guys will have to let me know what you think, if they should do that, or if they should just sort of ignore that going forwards. Let me know all that down in the comment section below, or how feasible you think it is that we will get a PvE game mode in the future. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave it a like, and if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload the video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it, and I'll talk to you all later.